wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
The Veracity Podcast.
Discovery Sessions.
Vancouver Island, how are you? I'm this episode's co-host Christian, and we sat with Our Place Society's Director of Communications, Grant McKenzie. Grant is a communications professional with an extensive career in journalism, including senior editorial positions with the Vancouver Sun and Calgary Herald. Before joining Our Place as Director of Communications, he was Editor-in-Chief of Monday magazine. Grant is considered a local expert on issues surrounding homelessness and addiction. He is also an internationally published thriller novelist with Random House, Penguin Canada, Midnight Inc., Polis Books, and more. On this episode, we covered pretty much the whole gamut of homelessness in Victoria, with topics such as a day in the life of Our Place Society, drug addiction, current barriers for the homeless, drug policy, the brand new therapeutic community center, and much more. Grant was truly a cannon of insight and had no shortage of charm, and it was an absolute pleasure to sit with him. So without further ado, enjoy. Well, Grant, thank you so much for jumping on the Veracity podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. I'd like to start the podcast with asking a personal question.
Sure.
Which is, tell me about your story and how you came to be in the position that you are today.
Okay. Well, I was a journalist for 30 years. So I started as a wee pup at the age of 19 at the Calgary Sun, and I was on the dead body beat, which was working from midnight till 6 and responsible for any interesting dead bodies that popped up overnight. And then I was going to college during the day. So that was the start of my journalism career. From there, I went on to the Calgary Herald, became an editor, columnist. Then there was a big newsroom strike in 2000 when Conrad Black took over. And myself and 100 other senior journalists lost their jobs, and we decided to have to reinvent ourselves again. So I became a graphic designer for a while and also a tech columnist, and then moved out to BC. This was back in 2005. Finally got back into the newspaper business with the Vancouver Sun. I was a front page editor there with the Vancouver Sun. And that only lasted for a couple of years. It was a fill-in position. And then after that ended, my daughter at that time had graduated high school and was going to UVic. So my wife and I, we moved to Victoria because this is where we always meant to be. And as soon as I landed here, I became editor of Monday magazine, back when it was sort of still doing news. And so I ran that for about 2.5 years, and we won, myself and my two reporters, it was a pretty small team, we won more journalism awards than any other newspaper in British Columbia at the time. It was we're doing a lot of really cool stuff. But then the publisher decided that she wanted to turn it into more of an entertainment magazine, and it didn't need an editor, so I was let go. And then the opportunity came up at Our Place. And what made that really simpatico was that I had been doing a lot of social justice stuff, especially with Monday magazine, and also in my fiction career as well. I write fiction novels, and a lot of that's about social justice. And so it was a really good fit. And so I landed that job, and I've been there. I'm now in my 7th year at Our Place, but it's been a really good fit because I'm a storyteller, and I'm telling the stories of the people who are the most vulnerable in our community. And that's been really rewarding for me, doing something that's really heartfelt.
Now, you've written a number of books. And primarily fiction? Yeah,
I've written 10 novels. They're all mystery thrillers, 7 under my own name and 3 under a pen name. And the pen name books I write in first person female, which is why I use a pen name, whereas the Grant McKenzie novels are all written in third person.
Interesting. Now, how much inspiration do you get from your work at Our Place for your writing?
I get inspiration from everything I do and everywhere I go, and there's always little nuggets that stay with me. And it's more like by working at Our Place, by meeting the people that I meet, I think that when I am writing about someone who's homeless or someone who is suffering, that they become more well-rounded because I know these people as a whole person, not as, just a caricature. And so I think just getting to know a lot of different people on a lot of different levels, that helps when I'm writing, making my characters as realistic as possible.
Wow. And also, too, with this population, they're very honest, right?
Absolutely.
And what you see is what you get. And that in itself can be really inspiring.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's I've made a lot of friends in the street community. I've also lost a lot of friends. We have far too many deaths. But it really is fascinating where you can find those gems, where you can find those moments of inspiration. You know, there's lots of moments of despair, of course, but when you get those moments of inspiration, when you get those people who are really trying to make ends meet, it's incredible. And I mean, I must say that, you know, the hardest part for me is probably when I'm working with, especially First Nations women, and they open up to me and tell me their stories, and they're just gut-wrenching, you know, what they've had to endure and how they've ended up on the street. And that's probably changed, you know, how I look at First Nations as well.
Yeah.
Within Our Place, do you guys have a space where people can come together and share their stories and like have that circle?
We do. We have a healing center every morning. So it is led by the First Nations elder, and people come together there and they can share, and hopefully part of that is healing. And then we also have spiritual care center and spiritual care volunteers who come in, whose main job is to listen. You know, that is really their big job, is to be an ear, and so they get to share with people. As you can imagine, we deal with a lot of grief, you know, in the Our Place family. So we do have grief counselors and things like that too. And so that's a big part of it.
I wanted to dive a little bit into the beginnings of Our Place. So when was Our Place founded and how did it come together? Sure.
The idea of Our Place has been around for over 50 years. You know, it was two organizations, the Open Door and the Upper Room came together to form Our Place about 12 years ago. That's when the building was first kind of opened. You know, they were both kind of doing the same type of work. One was the living room of the community. The other one was the kitchen of the community. So we brought those two facts together, and that became Our Place. And the neat thing about having that purpose-built building, which opened 12 years ago, is that it gave us so much room to work. A lot of charities, not-for-profits that are doing what we do are working out of the basement of a church with a 2-burner stove and a microwave. But we were able to build a commercial kitchen, a dining room, places where we can have spiritual healing, places where we can have clothing and showers, all that kind of things. And that's really how it became in this community center. You know, so it's been quite a journey.
So what makes Our Place different from some of the other shelters here in Victoria?
I think the big thing is that we're low barrier, which means people can come in, they can be drunk, they can be high, as long as they're not being violent. So I look at it as a sanctuary for people. They can come in, they can get warm, they can get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea anytime, they can get something to eat, they can build that community. But the big thing that we do, the main thing, is building trust with people. So when people come into Our Place, depending on where they are on their journey, you know, if they just want to grab a cup of coffee, sit in the corner, not be bothered, they can do that. And then what they tend to do when they do that is they start to look around, see if we're really all we say we are. And that's the beginning of building that trust. When they see that we're there to help and not to preach to them or not to change them into something they're not, but we're there to help them when they are ready to make a change. And I think that's a big part of it. And we also see a lot of community. You know, we treat everybody, I call people we all call people who are Our Place family members, because we try and treat everybody like family. And people start to feel that, you know, they really do. And we deal with a lot of different issues, but it's the frontline staff is incredible with how they treat people.
Yeah. What would you say is one of the most important aspects of an employee at Our Place in terms of what they bring to the table?
The big thing is empathy, without being a pushover. You know, I mean, a lot of the street community that we're dealing with, these guys are, they're professional con men, and that's their survival method. That's how they survive. They have to. They come up against red tape in government. They come up against red tape to do anything. So they have to figure out, how do I work? How do I survive? And so they become master manipulators of that system in order to get their survival needs met. And so we need people to be empathetic, but we also need people to be strong enough to say, you know what, this negative spiral you're on isn't really helping. Here's what we could do to change that. Here's how we could get you into proper housing, or here's how we could get you proper dental care. So it's a real kind of mixed bag. But you have to do that with gentleness and kindness and empathy. And so that's the biggest part.
Cool.
Is there any type of learning they can do there? Is any education given by Our Place?
Yeah, there is. For the family members you're asking?
Yeah, family members, and more so for the people on the street. Like, is there any way, because, some people may not finish simple, like, I don't know, K to 12 type schooling and want to progress. Is there any way that you provide that for them? Or?
Absolutely. We team up. We have over 800 volunteers, from all different walks of life. But the big thing we do is we really work closely with Camosun College. They've been fantastic. So we have a couple of their professors who come in and they teach basic English, and they teach basic math, and they also teach basic computer skills. And that can be anything from your ABCs to how to hold a mouse to maybe you need to learn a bit more about Excel because you've landed a job or something like that. And so Camosun has been brilliant with that. And so those are the big sort of learnings that we do there.
And you offer many, many programs at Our Place, right?
We do. We've got over 60 programs and services that are in a big variety of areas. Everything from healthcare needs, like we have volunteer nurses that come in and do foot care, which is so vitally important. And we have Victory barbers come in and volunteer haircuts. And all part of that is about health as well as just making people feel a wee bit nicer, and things like the showers, which are one of my favorite parts of the program. Because the thing I love about the showers is everybody gets half an hour in the shower, but we have volunteers that clean the showers after every use. So everybody's getting into a clean shower. And that's how we show dignity and respect for people. But then outside of healthcare, we also have social programs like an art club and a choir, a knitting program. And that knitting program is incredible because that is a way for people to interact with other people in a way. People who are on the street tend to have social anxiety. That's a big part of why they end up on their own. And men in particular they become like wounded bears. They want to hibernate. They want to hide. They're shamed by the fact that they've ended up where they are. Their stigma around their drug use. They've let people down in their lives, and so they tend to isolate and hide. And so things like the knitting program, even though it sounds so simple, but they can come in and they can watch that circle. They can hear those people talking, and they don't need to participate. But then as they start to warm up, as they get to see that there's no strings attached to this, they can sort of move into that circle. They'll be taught how to knit, and they can interact if they want or not. But it slowly starts to bring people out of that shell. It's the same when we bring in therapy animals, like the therapy dogs, having something that gives you unconditional love. For so many of the people, that's something they don't have in their lives. And so just that builds trust. So we have programs in a lot of different areas, and each one of them touches people in a different way.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions of the homeless population from the general public?
I think the biggest one is that people think people have chosen this life. That people have said, they decided to use drugs, or they decided to get addicted to alcohol, and it's just so untrue. Like, I don't know anybody on the street who hasn't suffered abuse or trauma in their lives, and that could be everything from prenatal trauma, like the crack babies you've heard of, or fetal alcohol syndrome, but also early onset sexual and physical abuse. I mean, almost everybody that I meet has been touched by that. This was not a choice of theirs to be here. The drug use, the addiction is a symptom of what they've gone through. It's not the reason for what they're going through.
Right. In terms of the homeless population, I believe there's a lot of focus right now on the fentanyl crisis, but it's been brought to my attention that the methamphetamine crisis is also quite severe. Is that something that you've observed as well?
Absolutely. I mean, and they're now starting to put fentanyl in crystal meth, but crystal meth is probably the most rampant drug on our streets, mostly because it's cheap, and mostly because it works fast. It's easy to take a hit and then conceal it. But it's just the absolute worst. I mean, as soon as you start smoking crystal meth, it starts to create holes in your brain. So you can imagine what that does to your personality, what that does to the way you think. But it also leads to people not being able to sleep. You know, it was originally created, I believe, during World War I, World War II by the Nazis to keep their soldiers awake at night. And so when you're up for a long period of time, when you can't sleep for days on end, you start to break down mentally. You know, you start to have schizophrenic breaks, and a lot of those aren't reversible. And that is really the huge downside of crystal meth. And I don't know if people, you know, that are even using it can really see what that means. You know, when I've talked to, you know, I was talking to actually a gentleman named Stingray the other day there, who was a heavy sort of, you know, crack cocaine user. And talking to him, and he's now been clean for quite a few years, and he talks to a lot of those guys when he sees them with their crack pipes and stuff like that, and he goes up and talks to them and says, you know what this does to you? Do you know what this did to me? And he starts to talk about the physical, you know, like the tumors that grew inside his body, you know, the removal of his bladder, you know, all of these types of things, and he's just trying to get through to people that all of these drugs are so harmful because they're full of all sorts of bad stuff, but the damage that they do to you, you know, it ages you way beyond your years.
Yeah, speaking of age, what kind of age groups are coming through our place? Because it can start pretty young, from what I know.
It does. I mean, our place is a 19 and up building. The reason for that is safety. We don't really want any unsupervised young people in there because we are low barrier. So, you know, we don't check criminal activity at the door. We don't check criminal records and that kind of thing. And we know there's a lot of people there. So it's 19 and up. So, but you start to see a lot of young people in their 20s, especially with the Harbour, which is right next door to us, which is a supervised injection site. So we're starting to see more and more people coming there. And that's kind of a double-edged sword. You know, it's you want the people to be visible, because prior to the fentanyl crisis, if you were a drug user, because of the stigma around it, you would go into a doorway, you would go into an alleyway, you would go into a stairwell, and that's where most of the deaths occurred. People in doorways and stairwells. Isolation. Yeah. So the Harbour brings them out of that isolation, you know, because they can use there in a place where if they overdose, and really you've got a 50-50 chance of overdosing every time you use. If they overdose, there's somebody there with Narcan that can save them. We also have, of course, security cameras out there. So if we see somebody on the street, we can run out, we can help them survive. We don't always get there in time. We had one just a couple of weeks ago because it was a full block and a half away from us. And the time we got there, the person had been dead for an hour, you know, because they used alone. And so you're seeing those young people come out because they know the dangers, you know, and that. So it's a double-edged sword in the sense that you want them to be visible so they're not dying, but it's so heartbreaking to see them because you just don't want them to be using these drugs. And then that said, from the younger end, we're also seeing a lot more older people now. And part of that is because of harm reduction. You know, normally people on the street die about, 48. You know, that's an old man on the street. So they're dying at 48. And now we've got people in their late 50s, 60s, early 70s. And that's going to become a whole new problem in the future, because now we're not only dealing with an aging population, which, all of Canada will have to deal with because we haven't prepared for that at all, as you can tell by the state of some of the seniors' homes. Mm-hmm. But now we're dealing with seniors that have an active addiction. So seniors' homes don't want them. Hospitals don't want them. So we need palliative care for senior drug addicts. And that's something that never crossed people's minds because usually they died before they became a senior. Yeah. So big range.
So what's being done for the youth side of the scale here in Victoria?
So the youth side, there are a couple of organizations. Out of the Rain is a winter shelter for youth that take in youth overnight. Youth have to be sober to access that, so that cuts out some of the youth. But I know that the numbers even there are quite staggering. 40 kids a night sleeping rough, in there. And we also have some other agencies that are strictly focused on youth. and trying to do similar to kind of what we do at our place for the youth population, except with a bit more medical connection, which is great. So trying to get kids into therapy, trying to get them into dealing with their mental illness and get them on the proper medication for that. And so there are some options for youth.
In terms of harm reduction, what does that actually look like on the inside? Because I feel like that's a pretty controversial topic right now, and I'm just wondering if you can kind of take us through that process and how you approach that at Our Place.
Sure. So the bottom line of harm reduction is keeping someone alive. And what I like to say is that a life saved today is a life that could be transformed tomorrow. Maybe that's overly optimistic, but that's kind of how we look at it. So for us, especially over the last, I guess we're heading into year 3, last 2.5 years, is if you looked at what an outreach worker did 3 years ago, they might respond to 1 overdose in a year, maybe. When we called an ambulance 3 years ago, when we called an ambulance, it was because someone was having an alcoholic seizure. Usually one of our more senior family members, someone who's in there, by senior I mean, mid-40s to mid-50s kind of thing, but having an alcoholic seizure. And that's when you would call an ambulance. And now, over the last 2 years, we are every time an ambulance comes to our place or the harbour, it's for a drug overdose, usually a fentanyl overdose. And so one of our outreach workers, I was talking to Benoit not that long ago, and he had just saved his 200th life in the last 2 years.
Wow.
Whereas before that, he wouldn't have really probably saved any, right? And what a difference that is, because now the outreach worker is a first responder. And that's something that they never signed up for, something they never expected. And now they're that first response. And so we see harm reduction as, harm reduction really started with the HIV crisis. Right. Make sure people had clean needles so they weren't contracting HIV and hepatitis C. That was the main reason for it. And now it really is over and above the clean needles and the clean, pipes and all that kind of stuff. It really is about checking in, is making sure that, is Floyd still alive today? It's about giving people Narcan when they've overdosed. So it's changed. We're still giving people, clean needles and that kind of thing, but really it's a bit more hands-on now. It's a bit more, let's make sure that, Floyd's alive, and let's make sure that he's getting what he needs. And what you hope is that that when someone hits their bottom, and for everybody that bottom is something different and can mean something different. But what you hope is when someone hits that bottom, that you've built up enough trust with them that they can then say, I need help. Get me into detox, get me into treatment. And then we hope that we can be there to do that.
Speaking of help, do you feel like the city of Victoria is where it needs to be in terms of the supports for these people?
I think it's bigger than the city of Victoria. I think that's the hardest part, is that we've been let down on a national level for the last 20 years. And of course that spills down to the provincial level. And then, because really the city would like to do what it can to help us, but it's kind of beyond what they can do, on a municipal level. The province has really stepped up since the last election. They're really trying to put more resources into housing. BC Housing's been really good. The only trouble is it takes a long time to build housing.
Right.
Right now we really need shelter. But, they're really kind of stepped up. They've even got a ministry now of mental health and addiction. So they're really looking at it. But I think the biggest, and the federal government has kind of stepped in now, but I kind of feel that it's not being treated as seriously. We've been talking about the new coronavirus, the new SARS virus that's hitting, and we really have to look at homelessness and drug addiction in the same way. We have to look at it as an epidemic. It really is a plague, and we're not treating it that way. We're treating it as if it's something that will go away, and it really won't.
What are your thoughts on decriminalization? So, for example, Portugal's model, which I think was established maybe 11 years ago, and where we're at today in North America.
I think that decriminalization would be very successful if we looked at it in a slightly different way. When you talk to First Nations people, they talk about 5 to 7 generations. That's how they measure healing. So people who have gone through the 60s swoop, that has affected their children and their grandchildren. But hopefully their great-grandchildren won't have the stigma, won't have the trauma from that 60s scoop. And I think we have to look at decriminalization in that way. Because I think a lot of people can't get their head around, why should I give free heroin to a drug addict? But if you could give prescription heroin to a drug addict today, their grandchild may not know that heroin existed because it's taken off the street and the black market has disappeared, and you've kept those people alive. You've kept their children alive, and the heroin market could collapse. So we're not going to make, the only difference we're going to make to the addict today is keeping them alive. But that could be different for their children, for their grandchildren. And so I think we have to look at it in multi-generational. So when people can't get their head around that aspect, they have to think 5 generations down the road. What would it mean if we decriminalized drugs today for those people?
Yeah.
5 generations down the road.
And speaking of Portugal, you guys have opened up a therapeutic community center, which I believe is actually modeled after Portugal and Italy and some of the programs that they have established. Would you mind taking me through that and just what it is to begin with, and then we could kind of explore it a bit?
Yeah, you bet. So we opened this therapeutic recovery community a year ago. So we had taken over the former youth custody centre in View Royal, and we took it over when there was a tent city here in Victoria on the courthouse lawn. So we opened up. We called it Choices at that time because people had been traumatized by jail, didn't want to go into jail. So we set up all these tents in the courtyard, and the choice was you could come here, stay in this nice, because it's right on the Goose. It's a beautiful spot. Come here, have a tent in the lawn there. We will provide meals, hot showers, and then as we opened up the inside, we said, winter's coming. Why don't you help us renovate the inside? If you want this room, you could paint it your color. We're going to change all the locks so that you have access to it and it's not the big jailhouse locks. And so people started to get invested. So it now became their sort of place. And so by that winter, everybody who was out in the tent, we had 50 people, were inside, nice and warm for the winter. So it took us about 1.5 to 2 years to get everybody housed, because it was always meant to be temporary. We had told the community it was temporary, and that was our goal. When Kool-Aid opened the Tally Ho Hotel, they took that over. That allowed us to move the rest of the people into the Tally Ho. So now it's empty. And so we approached the government, the provincial government, and we said, so Choices was a great success, worked wonderful, but we really have this idea of bringing some hope. And that was the whole point of it. When you're dealing with an addiction crisis and you're seeing death after death and you're doing 2 or 3 memorial services a week, you start to lose hope. You really do. People are dying all around you. So this was our idea. A therapeutic recovery community was our idea of hope. It was designed to break the cycle of going from the street to jail, back to the street. And every time you go back to jail, your jail sentence is longer. And every time you get let out, you've got $20 in your pocket and a bus ticket. Where are you going to go? Right back to the street. And then you go back into crime, back into jail, back into your addiction. So we approached the government. They liked the idea. We set up some private funding. We went to our donors and we raised funding, and we got a commitment from the government for funding for the first 7 years. They gave us the facility for $1 a year. And so we have now opened that up. It's been open for a year now. We have renovated it, so deinstitutionalized it. Right now we've got 21 guys in there. It's men only. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, we just found that the general population who are on the street are 80% men, 20% women. Most of the women on the street have been abused and are constantly being abused by men, and so we didn't feel that would be fair on them. We didn't feel that would be a healing environment for them to be in, and so it's male only, and they're working hard every day to find the right way of living. A lot of the guys are dealing with, they've been in, like one of the guys I know, he was like born into the Hells Angels, so all his mentors, everything he knew was criminal thinking. When he went to resolve an argument with somebody, it was with a knife or a fist. And that doesn't work in regular society. And so you're trying to teach different ways of handling situations. And you're also trying to get a handle on any physical ailments they have, any mental health ailments they have, and try and balance people. And get nutrition. Nutrition's huge when you're living on the street. So good nutrition, doctors, nurses, counselors. But the big part is it's peer-led, which means that if I'm talking to somebody and he's grown up in the Hells Angels, he's going to look at me and go, what do you know? But if he's got other people in there who have gone through that lifestyle and they've turned their lives around, it just means so much more. They say, I want to be like him. He's now reconnected with his children. He now has a positive relationship with his wife or his ex-wife, and those are all things that people want. We all want to be accepted. And so it's a really interesting program, done with empathy and care. And it's a 2-year program because it takes that long for people to, deal with their inside, deal with everything that's running around in their head. And the whole goal of it is that once people have graduated at the end of those 2 years, is that they have a place to live, they have a job, they have reconnection with their family, if that's a positive thing for them. It's not always a positive thing. But most importantly, the skills needed to keep all of those. And so it's a very positive program. It's still in the early stages. We've got a long ways to go, but we're very positive about it. We're very excited about it. And some of the results we see are quite incredible.
Yeah, if you don't mind me asking, it seems like that would be a very challenging population in particular. And so with that said, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced so far? You guys have been running for about a year now?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, and probably one that we didn't quite anticipate, perhaps we were naive, but because we see it as this fantastic opportunity, why wouldn't you want to be there? But the big thing, I think, has been sort of the dropout rate of people. Like we were also working with the courts so that people who are being sentenced to 3 months in jail, or longer, they can apply to go to the therapeutic recovery community instead. Now, some of them, of course, would think, that'd be a doddle, it'd be way better than jail, certainly more comfortable and better food. And they don't quite realize how much work is involved. And because when you open those doors and you look into your own dark shadows, you can imagine what you can find. And so the dropout rate, as soon as those 3 months were up, people were like, no, I'm gone. I want to go back to the street. I want to, go back to smoking drugs. I want to, whatever. And so that's really tough. So we're actually been talking to the courts over the last little while, and we're now looking at maybe only taking people who have a sentence of 9 months or longer, because we're finding 3 months isn't enough time. It's not enough time for people to get the program. And what we found is there's a program in Nanaimo, at the Guthrie Centre, which is part of the medium security prison there. And what we found there is that as people went through, they would do the first part of the program several times before it clicked. They become frustrated, they become angry, and they'd say, no, but they're in jail. There's no place they can go, so they have to try again. They start from the beginning. Whereas when it's more voluntary, when you're not in jail, when it gets too hard, you can say, no, I'm leaving. So that's been the hardest part, I think, is seeing people that could greatly benefit from what the program is, and they're choosing to go back to a life that, will kill them.
And what are the costs affiliated with this program?
Yeah, earlier you were saying the government has kind of let you down in funding, and you're getting most of your funding by donation?
Our place as a whole, we get about 50% of our donations publicly. Everything from people giving us $1 to people giving us $10,000. This particular program, we got, we raised over $1 million ourselves to start this program. The provincial government gave us funding as well as BC Housing and Island Health for those first 5 to 7 years. After that, it's supposed to become sort of stand on its own 2 feet, become independent. Whether that's possible or not, we will see. But So they're really supporting us in that way. They really are. And the reason for that is that they really want to see if this works. They really want to see this model work, and they want to see it so it can be taken across Canada. So for the guys that come in, there's no cost to them at all. Like there's no charge. It's all taken care of through, the welfare system, the prison system, that kind of thing. But it still costs us, probably, I'm not exactly sure, but I'd say probably $1 million a year to run this program. Might be a little bit more than that. And so it's a big expense. The thing is the more people that come in, the expenses won't necessarily go up. It's kind of more expensive now because there's only 21 guys in there. Once we get it up to 50, the cost will be roughly the same, but now you're dealing with 50. It's just getting that core group, getting those people committed,
And when are you expecting to get up to 50?
I'm not sure. I would hope by the end of this year we'd be up to 50. But I think there's still a lot of work to do with that, because the program becomes more successful as you get up to 50, because then you've got more people in that third stage, right? And those become your mentors. They become the people who are really teaching those new guys coming in. But I think that once we get it up to 50, once we get that so that people are constantly moving through the levels, then it just ticks over by itself. In the beginning stages, you actually need more staff than you do in the later stages. When you don't have as much peers that are in that third stage, you need more staff to help everybody out. But as the more guys come in, as more guys start to graduate, because it really is meant to be their program, them running those circles, them calling people and saying, hey, you know what, Joe, I think what you did yesterday was, criminal thinking. I think here's a better way that you could have handled this situation. And then they're also giving, push-ups to people saying, hey, you know what, that was fantastic what you said to Chris yesterday. I want to celebrate that. And that's where the program really starts to tick over. So
awesome. Now, is there opportunity for a women's house as well on the horizon?
I think there's definitely opportunity. It's certainly something that we have put out into the universe as something that we would like to see. But we really have to make sure that this model is successful first. We don't want to rush into a women's program without knowing that the model that we've got is successful. But it's certainly something that we would love to see.
Was there any reason it started on the male side instead of the female side?
Just because of the greater population of male.
The 80%.
Yeah, at our place we see, it's 80% male, so we saw the bigger need there.
Culturally, what are you seeing? Like, are you seeing, because there must be a lot of diversity here in Victoria. I'm wondering what's... at the
therapeutic recovery community?
Overall, yeah.
So overall, I would say, our place, I'd say about 30% of our population is First Nations, which is tragic because the population of First Nations across Canada is about 2%. But 30% of the street population we're dealing with are First Nations. So that's extremely difficult, I find. And then, we're sort of 8% male, 20% female. But we're also seeing, not just people who are addicted to drugs, not just people who have mental illnesses and a lot of severe mental illnesses. But we're also seeing people who have suffered traumatic brain injury. There was a recent study that came out, I think it was from UBC, that said over 53% of people on the street have suffered traumatic brain injury in their life, and that makes perfect sense to me. And we're also seeing a lot of people who have had workplace injuries, who have ended up on disability. Their disability barely pays their rent in Victoria, and so they're having to come to our place for meals and also sometimes for companionship. And so there's a real diverse group that we see, and that's why when we look at safety, we really look at safety for everybody that comes to our place. We don't really want anybody to feel afraid, and so we don't look at safety just for a small group of people. We try and make sure that our place is welcoming to everybody who needs our services.
What is the leading cause for homelessness?
From my perspective, I would say the leading cause is lousy parents. And by that, I mean abusive parents. I'm in sexual and physical abuse. People who are never wanted kids. People who have more kids than they can handle. And sometimes that can be a result of poverty, but it's like it all kind of stems from people's childhoods, from everybody that I talk to, that seems to become the underlying cause, is that at some point in their life, their family, whether it's immediate family or, larger family, has let them down in a really bad way. That really seems to be the biggest cause.
And in terms of solutions to homelessness, what do you think we need to be doing right now in this moment that we're not?
I think the big thing is we have to take it more seriously. I think we need the government to take it more seriously, to really look at it as something that we're ashamed of and something that we want to solve. I mean, when I look at Victoria, right now, we should be building a large shelter to accommodate 500 people. Different levels on that shelter. One really low barrier for people who are using crystal meth, who can't sleep, who need a place to be warm, but can't go into a sleep shelter because they're too disruptive. So you need like a level for them, so they're off the street, out of the cold, but they're not sleeping. They need a level for people who are sleeping. Level for couples. A lot of couples want access shelters because a lot of times they're male only or female only, and especially for women, that man, regardless of whether or not he's good for her, that man is their security network. That's who keeps them safe. And then you also need a place for people with pets. So right away, that immediate need is, and we're talking, that's a big shelter, 500 people, and they just recently built a 1,500 people shelter in Calgary, and that really kind of helped alleviate the streets. So we really need that shelter. Now, shelter's not a solution. Shelter is a Band-Aid, and it's transitional, but it's a Band-Aid that will always be necessary. There's some people that just can't access shelter, housing right away. So, but the second thing we do need is housing. If we can have housing that treats people with dignity and respect, housing that's supported, because a lot of people just won't make it if there's no supports there, if there's nobody checking in on them as outreach workers. They're giving them skills like cooking and cleaning and, how to take care of themselves, how to take their meds, how to, there's a lot of supports needed for people on the street. So we need that housing. And there's already plans in for some of that housing to come on board, but we need to look at it as it's not a one-off solution. We have to be building housing every year so that 4 years down the road, another housing unit is coming on board for those people who've gone through the shelter system. And then once you've got people housed, then we really need to take a really hard look at our mental health situation, how we're treating people who are mentally ill, and how we're dealing with addiction issues, and how we can get people off of those addictive substances, or how we can handle those people on those addictive substances. And so there's a lot to be done. And even as I talk about it, it doesn't really sound that daunting if you had the resources. If the provincial and federal government said, enough's enough. Here's what we're going to focus on. Unfortunately with our system, especially when people are being re-elected every 4 years, that's what they concentrate on, is being re-elected. And so people that have big ideas, it tends to fail.
Takes time for those ideas to come to fruition, right?
Absolutely.
A 4-year cycle isn't enough.
Yeah. And to get people on board, you need everybody on board. You need everybody to say, what, I'm fed up. I think we can't leave this population of our people, our humanity, lying on sidewalks.
Have you seen a shift with the general public and their relationship with the homeless population over your time at Our Place, or how is that evolving or devolving?
I think it ebbs and flows. I think generally, overall, people are very empathetic. I think part of that message, like I'm talking about, where this is not a choice, is seeping through a wee bit. it's not all there. There's so many people that will look at somebody on the street and say, wow, he looks like he could get a job. And it's like, but you have no idea what's happening inside, his head, how he ended up there, what it means for him to walk through a door of a job, what he can handle, what his stress levels are. And so that can be tough, especially if somebody hasn't experienced it in their life. Like if someone in their family has never been addicted, if someone in their family has never, fallen through the cracks, it can certainly happen with our healthcare system. If they've never had to experience that, where someone has been injured on the job and then all of a sudden they can't pay their bills, but unfortunately, I guess a lot more people are being touched by it. And so they are becoming more empathetic toward it. But it ebbs and flows, because when we have things like the tent cities that erupt in people's neighborhoods, then a lot of that empathy goes away. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, a lot of fingers get pointed at organizations like Our Place, which are there trying to end tent cities. They'll go, you guys are causing this. And it's like, well, how do you work that out? But, so when things like that erupt, it brings a spotlight on it, which tends to get more government attention and deeds, so that we're actually working through it. But it can also shine a very negative light on people that just would rather that homelessness was hidden.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It really sounds like our society is failing on educating from a young age up. Like we should be teaching young kids, what it's like to suffer and what that can look like and what that can lead to. So there is that empathy and understanding up to the point of becoming an adult, so you can, be more of more service.
Absolutely. I mean, empathy is something that we don't teach at all in school. Mm-hmm. We still are very focused on competitiveness. That's a big part of what schools teaches, is that if you get the gold star, you're better than Johnny who got the silver star. If you scored the goal, you're a hero, and Johnny who didn't make the team because he's got a bad leg, he's not a hero. And that's a very, very, to me, old-fashioned, sort of masochistic way of looking at it. But that is how we look at teaching our kids. And so even in all those subtle ways, that's what they're learning. They're learning that it's better to be the best. It's better to be the boss. It's better to be, the person in charge, the person with the loudest voice, rather than the person who stops in the middle of the race to help the guy who's fallen over. That should be the part we celebrate, and we just don't.
Do you think empathy is innate, or is it something that can be learned?
I think it's something that can be learned, but I think that we're all born with it. I think it gets taken away from us. And I think it gets taken away from us in a lot of different ways. I grew up in Glasgow, Scotland, at a time, in the 60s when there was high unemployment, high rates of alcoholism, and thus high rates of violence. And so, luckily I grew up in a good working class home, and my parents were fantastic. But I still remember, friends of mine whose dads were unemployed, drinking, and would routinely, slap them across the ear for something they said. And if your dad is doing that to you, your empathy goes down and down and down. Every time you face violence, every time someone that supposedly loves you hits you, it takes away that empathy.
It's a coping mechanism.
Exactly, yeah. So I think we're all born with empathy, and I think through life we lose it. And I think even if you look at the adult world, when I look at some of those, the men that don't have empathy for guys working on the street, and it's kind of like, who beat you out for that job that made you feel angry at them, and then so you look around and go, who's weakest? Who can I step on? And that's kind of perpetual, in our society. And I think we need to, learn that being caring and empathetic is not a weakness. It's a strength.
How beneficial do you think it would be if it was mandatory for everyone in the greater Victoria region to spend one day at Our Place? Because I've spent a couple days there myself, and it just completely opened my mind and my heart. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it would be fantastic. We do this thing at Our Place called Sponsor a Breakfast, where local companies come in, or organizations or groups. Sometimes it's a group of friends, but they pay $500, and that makes a special breakfast. So every morning we have oatmeal, fruit, usually donated baked goods from the night before, and that's every morning. But when we have a special breakfast, it could be like pancakes and sausage, or bacon and eggs, or omelets and fruit. And the company that sponsors that comes in and serves it, and it's incredible what you see on people's faces when they're face to face with the people that they normally just step over, don't look at. I mean, we had a bank come in, and the senior manager there, in his suit, and he was talking to me afterwards, and he was just blown away. He says, because all these people come up and said thank you to him, and they showed that gratitude, and he was just blown away by that, because he didn't expect that in the least. And I think what you start to see that they're just like you and I. They're not caricatures, just normal people who have, turned left instead of right, or been tripped up on their way to this, and so it makes a big difference.
That could be scary for people too, right? Seeing yourself in them and realizing I'm basically one paycheck away from that, right? I think a lot of people are, and it's just one of those things where it's very real.
It is, and as you get to know people too, I mean, we have some people who used to run their own businesses. We've got, one of the women I was talking to, she used to be a psychiatric nurse. It can hit you anywhere, any level. You just don't know when something tragic can turn your life completely around. And I think as you start to talk to people, you really start to see, this could be just my buddy I'm playing pool with, rather than, someone that you associate with a homeless person.
Absolutely. And a hot question for you, the Vic PD.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they play a massive role at our place. Every time I walk by or drive by, I see them. And how has that been?
We actually have a great relationship with Vic PD. Del Manick is fantastic. He comes down all the time to visit us. And we have a good relationship because we want our place to be safe. That's a big one. So we rely on Vic PD a lot to come down when there's anything violent that's happening. Usually when violence occurs, it's a family member against a family member for whatever reason. But a lot of times, we're not strong-arming people. We're not getting in the thicks of things. We're not bouncers. And so we rely on Vic PD to come down. But the big thing is that we find that Vic PD has changed dramatically over the last 6 years, or maybe even a bit longer than that, is that they're now much more empathetic. They've, under their police chiefs, the last few police chiefs they've had, have really sort of emphasized a more humane approach to the homeless. They're really learning more about mental illness. They're really learning that sometimes when somebody is really acting out, it's not a deliberate act. It's not a criminal act. It's a health thing that's happening. And so they've had a lot of training too. And the guys that come down there, the men and women that come down there in uniform, they get to know people one-on-one. They get to know how to handle them. And so that's been really positive. We're always going to have some of the family members who are triggered whenever they see our uniform. Yeah. We're going to have some advocates who are angry at us for having, look at the last special meal, for example. We do Easter meals and Thanksgiving meals and Christmas meals, and I always invite the police chief and some of the officers down to help us serve, as well as local politicians, because I feel it's important for the family members to see, because it's a sit down, the volunteers come and they serve. I want the family members to see these prominent members of our community serving them, and saying, here's your meal, sir. And I think that's a positive thing. But, some of the homeless advocates, of course, will rail against that and say there's no way you should have a police officer in there. And I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. But.
Yeah. How important do you think it is to dissolve those barriers, though? Right? Because primarily in the past, the blue uniform was the blue uniform, right? And that in itself became a caricature. But of course, behind the blue uniform is a person. Absolutely. And I think both sides of the fence have to reach out to one another.
Yeah, and I think...
Is that a pipe dream? I don't know.
No, it's... There is obvious trauma for some people, especially for, a lot of the First Nations people. Yes. A lot of that is with the RCMP rather than Vic PD. But so there is that trauma that's there.
That history, yeah.
And you have to respect that. But I think it's all about, and kind of what I was saying at the beginning of the show, is that it's about that respect. When they see a police officer being there, and they're not there to arrest them, they're there to do something else, but they see that level of respect. They see, oh, this guy knows my name. He'll stop and said hi. He, isn't busting me for having a crack pipe on me. As they're building that respect, they're starting to see the human behind the uniform, just as we always encourage the public to see the human behind the disheveled family member. And so I think that becomes a two-way street. I think as every positive experience you have with a police officer will start to negate those negative ones you've had.
Right.
And most of the negative ones are because you've been up to no good, or you've been having some kind of health breakdown.
So what's around the corner for our place? What are 2020 goals or goals in the next 3 to 4 years, 5 years? What's happening?
It's kind of an odd place for us at the moment, in the sense that we have grown so much in the last 5 years. We have opened so much that we want to make sure that everything we're doing is the gold standard. So especially 2020. 2020 will be, we're currently headhunting for a new CEO. We've got a great leadership team that are running the show at the moment. But the big thing, I think, is really looking at everything we're doing, is really making sure the therapeutic recovery community can be the best it can be, and then it becomes a model that can be taken across Canada. Make sure that our shelters aren't just a bed for the night, that they're providing, more connection. They're providing more supports for people. We're trying to get people, into employment that can do employment. We think outside the box a lot. When we open up a job program, we're not necessarily looking at putting someone in a 40-hour work week job, because some of those guys, that's impossible for them. But some of those guys can do 20 hours a week and do it really well and have that sense of pride. And so we really kind of think out of the box and different things like that. The biggest need coming up will be shelter. We don't have enough of it. We see that every night when we're turning people away. We're also, at the moment, we rent out First Metropolitan United Church Gymnasium. We have 60 people in there every single night. I've even got one older couple that's been in there for 2.5 years, every night, sleeping on a mat, getting up at 6:30 every morning, packing everything they own into their bags, coming to our place for breakfast. And we're going to be losing that, in 2021, because that part of the building has been sold. It's going to be torn down and something else is going to be built in its place. And that's a lot of people to not have homes for. So that's probably the big concern for 2020 is what we're going to do with those people. What housing is coming online that hopefully we can move some of those people into. And a lot of times moving people into a home is not just as simple as, here's a home. There's a lot of work that goes into getting people ready. Like that couple I talk about that have been there for 2.5 years. It's not for want of us trying to get them into housing. There are some psychological blocks there. A lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. This is something they know. This is something that's now part of their routine. And even though we say this would be so much healthier for you, so much better, there's a lot of obstacles there. It's like we're not dragging people up in a cart and hauling them away somewhere. It's like we want them to, have that decision, make that choice, make it so that it works for them. And when you lose something like First Met, that's going to be 60 people that we have to say, your home's no longer here. Hopefully it won't be all 60 at once. We'll be moving people out as we go. But that's going to be the biggest challenge, is finding enough shelter space for people.
Yeah.
And that's, again, a transitional period to get them into housing. But
yeah, I believe Don Evans actually said that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
It will.
So I think it's important that the public knows that.
It will. When you lose shelter space, because there isn't enough housing right now. There's housing in the forecast, but even even if you look at where Tally Ho is now, where we managed to move 50 people in, that's a massive big piece of land. And I know Coolidge has some fantastic plans for that property, but again, they're facing a neighborhood that doesn't want any more construction, especially social housing construction, in that neighborhood. And it's so important what they've got planned, and it's going to be so different from what people, because a lot of people think of, oh, it's Rock Bay Landing. And it's like, no, have you looked at their other sites? They're all, fantastic. But a lot of people just have this fear, and we, and the fear isn't really justified, but it's something that we deal with, like we want to be the best neighbor we can. We want to work with people, but there really is going to be, every stumbling block we run into, or Coolidge runs into, or Pacifica runs into, is another delay. And the more we delay, the more people end up in the street. And the more people on the street, the more people think, oh, well, you guys are failing, and that's a real sort of dilemma.
If you could say anything to the general public as to how to help or support, I mean, you were talking about people donating and volunteering their time. Is there any other way people, or can you speak more about what we could possibly do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously financial donations and volunteering is huge, but to me, a big part of it is talking to people. When you see someone on the street, you don't have to give them money. You can just say hi. If you're going into Tim Hortons and you see someone and you think they need a cup of coffee, you say, hey, would you like a cup of coffee? They might say no. They might say no, give me the money. But just saying hi to someone, just looking at their face, looking in their eyes and seeing them as a fellow human being, I think will make a big difference both to them and to yourself. Because we can't look at this as something that's happening to other people. It really is something that's happening in our community, and everybody's part of our community. And so the more we see the street population as our neighbors, the more we will want to help and come to the realization that nobody should have to live like this.
So your website is ourplace.com?
Ourplacesociety.com.
Yeah. Ourplacesociety.com.
Yep.
Perfect. So folks, if you're listening and you want to get involved, ourplacesociety.com.
Perfect.
And on that, I always open up the floor. If there's anything that you wanted to say, or
I think I've probably said quite a bit.
You certainly have, in the best possible way.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think. Coming up, we've got Beauty Day coming up, where we shows around Valentine's Day, where we do a special day for the women at our place, and we have beauty treatments and haircuts and stuff like that. So it's there's a lot of happy things that happen at our place. Like I think a lot of people don't quite realize that it's not all sad. It's not all despair and trouble. We have a lot of sort of fun days that we do, like Family Day. We're doing special little games, shuffleboard and hockey. We've got hockey in the courtyard and things like that. Like there's a lot of happy things that we do to help people have a normal day. And that's really what it's about. We're just helping human beings get through the day.
Awesome. Well, on that, thank you so much, Grant.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Veracity podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to support us, be sure to like, comment, or share. You can also follow us at Veracity Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for updates and exclusive content. If you're interested in being a featured guest on the show, you can visit our website at veracitypodcast.com and head on down to the Contact Us section. Thanks again for listening. It means so much to us, and stay tuned for more conversations just like this.